Yes, sir, we are live and we can start the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, good afternoon to everybody. And we have a interesting session today, very interesting session on transition to RE. What is the policy implementation approaches for 2052B? And we have a very distinguished speaker panel to discuss this. But before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Prabodh Acharya. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for JSW Group, and I have the responsibility today to moderate the session. And thank you, CII, for giving that opportunity to me. But before we open the session, it will be prudent for you all to know your speakers today. So, Mr. JP Chalsani, he's the strategic advisor, Suzlon Energy. Mr. Chalsani, if you can put your video on, people can see you.
Yeah, I'm there. Thank you.
And let me introduce him. Mr. Jairam Prasad Chaslani brings with him a rich experience of 40 years in the Indian infrastructure industry that is transcending a mix of both public and private sectors at companies such as NTPC, Reliance Power, Punj Lloyd, and Suzlon. What a wonderful experience he has. He's a mechanical engineer who is widely acclaimed for his project management and people leadership skills, rated among Asia's best CEOs on multiple occasions. Mr. Chalsani has been recognized for his leadership and employee engagement skills. At Suzlon, he was Group CEO, and his role was improving operations, enhancing and simplifying processes, and leveraging both HR and finance to position company for strong and sustainable growth to create a value for stakeholders. He is currently a strategic advisor to Suzlon Group and an independent power sector consultant. And in his illustrious career, as you could see, that in the power sector from generation to retail power distribution, he has been active participant in formulation of many government policies in power sector. Who else would have been best to discuss today's policy scenario? Welcome, Mr. Chasani, to this panel. I will love to hear from you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll now introduce Mr. Sanjeev Agarwal. He is MD and CEO of Amplus Solar. Sanjeev is the founder and CEO of Amplus Energy Solutions Private Limited. Is one of the Asia's largest distributed solar company. He has 25 years of experience in the thermal and renewable energy sectors, working with power utilities, banks, and consulting companies in India and Europe. His vision of providing low carbon energy solutions to everyone has enabled Amplus to create a name in distributed solar company and to scale it up from the first plant of 100 kilowatt in 2014 to over 850 megawatt of rooftop and open access solar project in 2021. Prior to Amplus, he was managing director of AES Distribution of Indian subsidiary. He has recognized as a young leader of a Federation of Indian Chambers and Commerce and Industry FICCI. Sanjeev has also won Global CEO Award by Finance Monthly for 2 consecutive years in 16 and 17 for leading Amplus Energy on its growth plan. I mean, many accolades for Sanjeev. He's currently serves on various high-level committees in an industry expert. At FICCI, he's a member of Solar Energy Task Force, Renewable Power Committee, and Renewable CEO Council. He's also served as the co-chair of CII Northern Renewable Committee and a member of CII National Solar Committee. Sanjeev is trained as a mechanical engineer with an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. Welcome, Sanjeev. I look forward to your valuable input to today's discussion.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Venkatesh R, Managing Director and Director Energy Business of Wärtsilä, India. He is graduated with a Bachelor of Technology in Mechanical Engineering from University of Calicut and have a management degree in Operation and Marketing from University of Mumbai. Mr. Venkatesh has 30 years of experience in the marine and energy sectors. Wonderful. During his career in Wärtsilä, he has worked in India, Singapore, Finland, managing strategic roles. In his latest role, he has been Area Director for Middle East Asia based in Singapore. With his role in Varsila India, he is responsible to enhance India's market leadership with innovating life cycle solution and accelerating the renewables and decarbonization journey, propelling the business to greater height. Welcome, Mr. Venkatesh, and we will be pleased to hear today in subsequent discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Prabhat.
Last but not least, Ms. Dibya Sharma, very well known internationally. She is the Executive Director, Climate Group India. I know her personally, driving so many climate change initiatives across the globe and spearheading in India. My honor to introduce Dibya. Dibya Sharma is an international climate and urban development expert specializing in climate resilience, urban development planning with almost 20 years of experience operating throughout India and internationally. She has a doctorate in urban climate resilience and a master's in urban development planning. In her career, she has worked in various capacities, wearing different hats as she called, including being a thought leader and knowledge communicator. We love to hear your thought today, Dibya. Just to introduce, before joining the climate group, Dibya led the urban policy and planning portfolio at Oxford Policy Management Limited, a development consulting firm based in Oxford in the UK. At OPM, Dibya set up and developed OPM's new urban policy and planning portfolio and led international and national assignment within the urban and climate space. Before OPM, Dibya worked also in TERI, India's premier think tank and research center for climate change and energy transition. Welcome, Dibya. We love to hear today. Having such a illustrious panel, I will not really stand between them and the audience. But before I hand over the mic for your initial thoughts, let me set the context for this discussion today. As we know, I mean, this decade is the decade of action, and India's journey to decarbonizing its economy is very much depending on how we successfully implement the energy transition. There are in the landscape you see, there are various policies implemented, upcoming policies, maybe something towards the producers, but more so now needed is that how the industry is a business, while they themselves committing towards sustainability and reducing their dependency on the thermal energy, what are the policy supports required? What are the landscapes should look like in this decade to set that foundation right? So this session today would deliberate on the policy landscape as it exists, both at federal level, central level, and state level, make recommendations on easing the landscape for wider adaptation of clean energy, which is consumer centric, along with their supply chain, because the supply chain is very important for the business also to know how they can transit to the renewable energy. So highlight and analyze the policy initiative taken by role of different bodies, government governance framework, and the overlap of multiple policies if it is there. So let me now turn to Mr. Saslani to give your initial feedback on how you see this policy framework and what it should to accelerate this transition. Over to you, Mr. Saslani.
Thank you, Mr. Acharya. I think looking at who is going to speak next to me, the three of them, my job is a little easier. So I think I need not be so elaborate because these are the people who know much better than me. But still, let me talk about at the sectoral level. Obviously, if you look at last one decade, renewable has been the mainstay for us. Then, I think the quickest capacity addition of 100 gigawatt of renewable energy. I've seen the conventional power growing in my 4 decades in the power sector, but the amount of time the conventional sector took to reach 100 gigawatt versus renewable energy 100 gigawatt is really the fastest. So that's a good achievement for us. On the commercial side, in 1 decade, we moved from a regulated tariff of 17 rupees plus for the solar to sub 2 rupees. I think we moved not just the capacity, I think even on the tariffs, we moved in the 1 decade 17 to 2 rupees. Obviously, today we have a huge FDI flowing into the sector. And more importantly, the pool of players who are coming to the sector has significantly increased compared to what it used to be in the conventional power. This also helped on a lighter vein, on the serious note, many of the professionals to get converted into green. My colleagues sitting here, Sanjeev and me, were colleagues together and were trying to develop a large ultra mega coal-based project. And of course, we abandoned in between because of various policy hurdles. He moved from coal to the complete green entrepreneur, from professional to the entrepreneur. I think this sector also provided many people to become an entrepreneur. I think that's significant achievement compared to the conventional to the renewables, because the professionals turning into entrepreneurs would always help the sector, and which we are seeing in this segment. That's, I think, the context in which this. But when we want to move from now 2020 or 2021 to 2030 is what we need to see that where are we going and how we want to go and what we want to do in this one decade, as you rightly said. If you look at today, if I need to define the sector at 100 gigawatts, let's say by capacity, we're about 25% of the total installed capacity. But by generation, we are still hovering around 15%. So in the today's situation, when I look at the supply and demand, the demand is variable. Obviously, it is varying with respect to hour of the day, it's varying with respect to the month, season-wise. Demand is variable, but the supply is more or less firm because most of the supply is coming from dispatchable power stations, which are like 24/7 power stations, mostly the conventional, because renewables is still just 15%. So therefore, between the two, demand and supply, only the demand is variable, supply is still constant. But then now move the scenario to 2030, where we want to reach 450 gigawatts of renewable energy, which the way we are progressing in the past. Maybe sometime a few years back, would have looked at really impossible task to achieve, but now I think it's feasible, provided the whatever we discussed today with respect to the policy hurdles, other things being remote. But the moment you reach 450 gigawatts of renewable energy, so what it would make is that it would become about 55% of the installed capacity. Predominant is renewable energy. More important is 40% plus becomes the generation share, energy share. So therefore, we will reach a situation where your demand continues to be the variable if you don't do anything today, and your generation also becomes variable. When you have a supply and demand both become variable is what is the most difficult situation you reach to match. Only one of them being variable, it's fine, because today demand is varying, but you have stations which can give you 24/7, 365 days powered, and there's no issue. But when the supply also becomes variable, then the real issue comes unless we start acting from today in the next one decade. To give a simple example is that if you look at solar, which would almost become 1/3 of our generation capacity at 280 gigawatts, let's say in 2030, 40% of its generation, 90% of its generation comes between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. But our energy demand today, only 40% of the energy demand is during this period. 60% of the energy demand is between 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. At that point in time, solar is almost zero. So therefore, if you are going to have this sort of situation, what policy initiatives are required right at this stage, both on the demand side and the supply side, becomes very, very important. We didn't act too much on the demand side till now, though we've been trying, but it's necessary for us to work on the demand side in terms of the time of the day tariffs. Today, whether I use a washing machine at my home at a peak hour time, let's say morning 9 o'clock or evening 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, or I use at 2 a.m. in the morning, I pay the same tariff. So there's no time value for when I consume the power. We got to get onto the time of the day tariffs and then start moving the demand towards the generation when it is going to be available. More generation, cheaper generation is going to be available. I think that's mandatory. We started the process. We are in the initial stages. We're talking about TOD for quite some time, and we're talking about smart metering now and various things. So therefore, it's mandatory for us to start monitoring the demand and moving the demand curve to some extent based on the generation, because till now this was not required, but it becomes mandatory now with variable generation coming in. On the demand side, on the supply side at the same time, while we continue to add the capacity this way, it has to be in a planned way of how do we make it more from variable power to round the clock power. Now, how do we actually add on solar plus wind together and how do we make more storage to come in? There has to be a planning. You can't have a situation 35%, one third of your capacity at 5 p.m. suddenly getting out of the grid. Okay, you can imagine, because these are all must-run stations. They're all cheaper powered. Obviously, I'm assuming that they will continue to run. They should run. So therefore, at 280 gigawatts getting out of the grid suddenly at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. in the evening. So what happens to that? So there are plans right now, but I think we need to do much more rather than, trying to get up later, because you're seeing these problems being faced in elsewhere. You're seeing this in California crisis. You're seeing in Texas. You're seeing in different places. So this one decade, in addition to the smaller issues or many policy level issues, which I'm sure that my colleagues here on the panel are going to talk about. So they want to talk about open access. You talk about different things. For me, the fundamental issue is how do you actually control the demand side? How do you actually increase the supply to be from variable to the more of around the clock, so that we bridge that gap of two variables, supply and demand, is the challenge country is going to face from now to then. So while we have many other challenges, but this is much bigger challenge. Why I'm highlighting this needs time. It can't be done overnight. It has to be planned a decade ahead and saying that this is how we're going to move ahead. Otherwise, time of the day, we've been talking for decades. So it really didn't happen to that extent, because there was no compulsion for us, because we had a 24/7 power supplies, power generating capacity. Now we will not have that sort of power generation capacity. It's going to be variable power generation. So therefore, it's now mandatory. So that's what I think is one we need to work on. There are many other factors as we move ahead. I think even in the Q&A session we can talk about. But if I need to highlight one, is that all policies towards making this variable supply and variable demand match each other. Otherwise, we will have a serious issues. That will be my opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Saslani. I think this is very you hit on the nail that not only managing the variable demand and supply, and in the sense how it's in the growing curve when the demand and supply both are going to grow, and managing those is going to be challenged. This is a very good point you brought in. I'm sure we'll have many more discussions toward that. Let me now turn to Mr. Sanjeev Agrawal to provide his opening remark. Sanjeev ji, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think a very, very relevant point Mr. Shalsani has made about how this energy transition is actually happening. The world is moving from a very different world. It was like a large centralized plants, as we are all used to seeing large coal-fired plants, to a world where we are moving into decentralized plant. We want to decarbonize it, and the complete onslaught of technology which is happening in every sector is creeping into energy space faster than what we can imagine. Right, the type of blockchain, people start talking about blockchain. People start talking about how we can adjust energy against each other, distributed energy, storage, electric vehicles. So there is a complete new confluence which is emerging, and uh, unfortunately, if we don't change with the times, we'll be left behind. Many of our existing plants, many of our existing policies, many of our existing regulations need to evolve with time. And this is a test not only for India, for any country in the world. Many countries will move faster than what we are moving. Many countries will even work slower. But I think we need to find our own pace, and we work in a very complex environment as far as political and the policy and the regulations are concerned. So we have all this desire that we need to develop a very long-term strategy. I wish we were like probably some of the countries which plan for 10, 20, 30 years, but we have a vision. We have a vision now with the Prime Minister thinking like, okay, 2030 we should have electric vehicles, 2030 we should have hydrogen cells. But are our different parts of the body really working together? So brain is thinking, but the hands and legs are moving all in different directions. So is that really the way forward? So on the other hand, you find the citizens of this world, including the corporates like yourself, JSW, or Amazon, or Walmart, or Google, Facebook. Everybody says we want green energy. From where that green energy will come when we have so much of uncertainty and the complexities in operating the grid? You can't work in isolation, because you may have your own rooftop plant or you may have your open access plant, but we are all connected to the larger grid. how does all that really become combined in a system where power can freely flow from one area to another, and there is a balancing happening at the same time? So I think this remains largely the theme if you look from a corporate perspective and the policy perspective and the emerging technologies, whether it is storage, whether it is hydrogen, whether it is fuel cells, electric vehicles, whether we can use electric vehicles to store the excess energy, like taking the example of a washing machine running in the afternoon. Can we use the electric vehicles to store that energy and use that energy in the evening, because my electric vehicles may be just connected to my home? I generate during the solar panels, storing the electric vehicle. That excess battery is sitting there. I use it in the evening. So I think the possibilities which are emerging in the energy side are completely unmatched. That is where there is a space for new entrepreneurs to come in. There is a space for new technology and new brain power to come into the sector and say, "Okay, this is what we can do. This is how we marry the old and the young," and say that this is the transition to a new energy, literally. So we are going into a new energy space where we need to transit, we need to evolve, we need to find out what really works for the larger society, because we just simply can't say, okay, I am setting up my solar plant. What happens to the people in villages? What happened to people in agriculture? What happened to the below the power line type of the consumers? We still need to serve them. So at some level, it is emerging like a universal service obligation plus the new emerging word of the telecom. So it's like the when what happened in the telecom space, you had a Bharat type of aspiring country which required that, okay, we still need connectivity. They are still not connected. And there's another one which is moving very fast. So interesting. I think it's a matter of great debate, and we can all debate about it. But to the extent we can all carry these messages that these are the things which are emerging, and these are the things that we need to think in whatever we are doing, the business, if you think of technology. So this is the scenario which is emerging. And if we can work in this larger ecosystem, we'll find many opportunities, because as business people, we look at opportunities. As society, we look at as a consumer that what we really want to consume. And as corporates, you look at what will give growth to my business, and we have to find. And politicians think very differently. So I leave it at that.
No, thank you, Sanjeev. That's a very interesting point. Is that to bring in policy flexibility with the emerging technologies should be the need of the hour for the decade, which you brought out. Is really quite interesting. Thank you, Sanjeev ji. May I request Venkatesh ji to provide your opening remarks, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Prabodhaji, and also my fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen who are in the call. Good afternoon. Safe day to you all. It's a very indeed a great privilege to me to join this session of big panel, and then also we are on a very important topic here, the transition to the renewable energy. And what we are looking at more here is the policy and implementation approaches for the future, 2030, 2050 as what we can think about. And my fellow speakers were already mentioning some of the key aspects which we were looking at. So maybe allow me to share a small overview of a study which we have done also. Maybe you can confirm if you are able to see the presentations there.
It's there. If you can please make it to PPT mode. You are in speaker mode. If you can change it to that's it.
Hopefully now it is, I suppose.
It's all good. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. So again, CII has been hosting this on a very, very important time. And then also, despite this challenging pandemic times, we are able to meet up on this virtual platform. So thank you very much for making that happen as well. So thank you for that. As Prabodha introduced already, I'm Venkatesh, heading the energy business for Re100 India and also the managing director for the company. Re100 is a young 180-year-old company, and we are around 4 decades in India. So that's a high-level overview of our company. And then if you look at what is our company's vision, and also more looking at the panel and the discussions we are having, we are envisioning 100% renewable energy future. And that's the tagline for our directions and what we are setting up on also. We see the transition happening. Transition is happening more and more towards flexible and sustainable power systems. And that is what is the need of the hour. We have witnessed this in many continents. And as we can see also, our role is to keep this change happening through decarbonization, through market leading technologies. That's very important. We need to move out from the conventional technologies towards this market leading technologies such as future fuel, enable balancing plants. Balancing solutions are very important. As you heard Zeslani talking about availability of these renewables during some part of the time, where we need it for another part of the time where peak demands are happening. That is important, and that is where technology solutions like energy storage and also optimization of the life cycle solutions comes into play, which is very important for us to take it forward. So what I would walk through with you also is how we are focusing on this energy transition and what we are looking at on India's optimal path towards a low cost net zero energy future. So that's the direction which I want to set your thoughts on. This is something which we all know. In the 1900s, we used to be generating power mostly from biomass and those type of fuels which were there. During the 1920s, the fossil fuels like coal, gas, all these came into picture. Oil also started to come in from the 50s, 30s, 50s part of it. So all these post 20s, if you see post 50s, there we start to get more energy dependent things. But all what we can see is that in the recent changes which we need to go with, from 2015, you see 60%, 65% of the additions are happening on a renewable energy front. And that's a pace which we have seen, unlike in many other decades, the first time or the recent decade development. And this is going to happen. As you see, the projections are also that it's going to happen, continue. And as you see the Asia part of it, it's going to happen much more than other parts of the world. So it's very important, Asia and then India being one of the top there. It's growing at a pace which is much more higher and faster. And also some of my colleagues mentioned about the cost of renewable technologies. That's also continuing to drop. And that's also a very important scenario. A few years back, we were at 17 and now we are at 2, less than 2. So that's the direction which we are going in. And solar and wind will play a major dominant role in this mix. But as we know, they are not available all the time. So what we need in these types of energy demand, we need renewable capacity together with a flexible generation which will support this balance of mix. What we need to also understand is that if we want to keep this global warming, which is very important climate change aspect which you're looking at, to the 1.5 degrees which you're looking at, already we are close to the 1.1 levels, we need to also increase these renewables. That doesn't come just as an easy mechanism. There we need to plan properly. So how do we plan this? So I will take you just a short background on this with a direction on the few milestones which we have achieved. As we saw, we achieved 100 gigawatt key milestone on the renewable energy in March. In 2022, we have an ambitious target of 175 gigawatt. All that is very important, and with the speed and the pace which we are doing with, it's also going in the right direction. What we need here is a right policy framework, and also falling cost of renewables have helped, but we need a policy framework which will help in balancing and also supporting us in the right way. Today, renewable energy is cheaper than any other form of the world, which we have come down now to, but the availability of it is very important, and trend will continue to improve. So what we need is the demand for growing renewable energies in the consumers also is important. That is where the supply demand type of thing was coming up, which was mentioned also by my fellow colleagues. The demand by the requirement of the industries are also coming on the green part. So that's also very important. But today we lack policies, we lack guidances. So that's also one of the things which we have to keep focusing on. When more and more industries want this type of renewables into the frame, how are we able to go with it? That brings us to one of the important considerations. How are we able to support this with the integration challenges, which is very important. So there is also this climate change report which has come in, and that is where I would like your focus on. Some of the key drivers which is bringing these energy drivers are mitigating the climate change is an important one. Also, rapidly decreasing price of renewables, which is bringing us to more renewables into the picture is also a help in the transition. But where we need is that when these demands increases, when this flexibility comes into play, we need to also able to support that with accelerated flexible generation. And that is coming through accelerated fuel portfolios, different dimensions which we can use with, and also coming up with full directions on the electrification needs and also on the future fuels. So as you saw, in a recent study which was done by CEA, an optimal power mix reveals, we need to go towards a optimal power generation solution. And renewable capacity, which is around 51% of the overall capacity which will come up, does not show much increase in coal. So that is where we have to look at also how we can future transition this. So as you see, what is our drive towards? Our drive towards is also for India, if you look at, is towards a net zero future. And net zero future is bringing towards us to a direction of what we call it, what is the right optimal mix in the system. And if you see the right optimal mix, as we see, solar is the future. So that's coming up mainly. Solar will come and solar would come up. So storage and ICE, the engine technologies, are the ones which are also able to help us in flexible balancing of this. The flexibility will unlock also the net zero future for India. So the transition going away from fossil fuels is expensive. But however, what we have seen is that when we look at as a cost optimal carbon neutral mix, there is always a increase in the cost of generation, but then at the end of the day, it is leveling out and then bringing us to a par, which is the best cost optimal solution. So if we look at demands will increase, there will be an increase in the direction also. But what we see is also that the direction on the future is the cost of electricity is also reducing in the right aspect. So the three aspects which we are looking at going forward to 2030, going towards the 2050, more flexibility we need to lock in to get the unlock the net zero future. So as we look at this direction, the most important aspect, if we can look at on the key drivers, are we need to decrease the electricity cost, which will be coming up through the different models which you have seen. We need to also cut down the reliance on this imported fuels, which is very costly these days. So if we create this industry with the newer direction on the renewables and also going on the right direction with the flexibility and also the right optimal mix, what we can get is a carbon neutral, cost optimal solutions, which will cut also a projection to 48% of electricity cost by 2050 compared to 2020. So looks good. The studies look good. The studies show it like that. What we need is a good framework and a policy which will help us to get there. So that's one of the key drivers, which is also this particular topic is looking at. So as a concluding slide, I would say, what we need are set long-term targets, which is very important because we cannot build these in 1, 2, 5 years things. We need to build it in 10, 20, 30-year terms. Again, drive the renewables consumption across different sectors, which is very important, not just power consumers, different aspects like the EV, storage, the automobiles, different aspects of it also come into play. Strengthen the supply side flexibility. That is very important so that, the demand supply is matched also. And what we need is also a future development, which will also bring in for newer fuels, newer developments, for example, hydrogen, which is very important, which is talked about. Today, our engines can already run on 25% hydrogen mix. And as and when more flexible solutions are available, the solutions are also catering towards running on that. So that type of future proofing of assets will help us to take also a bigger aspect on it. So a great policy together with the right portfolios is what will help us to go towards it. That would be my submission, panel members, for you to look at. And then thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share these findings and thoughts with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkatas. That was a fair summary of the recommendations at the end. And I looked at, RE capacity with the flexibility is the need of the hour. Thank you. Let me now turn to Divya. Please, may I request you to have your opening statement?
Thank you, Prabodha. A lot has been said by the previous speakers, so I would like to be brief in what I want to speak today. According to IEA's India Energy Outlook 2021, the country is projected to see the largest rise in energy demand of any country by 2040. Its electricity demand is set to increase more rapidly than its overall energy demand at around 4.7% each year, if I'm not wrong. India has already set itself for a broad-based clean energy transition. There's no doubt about it. The turnaround in the power sector is driven by, among other things, India's ambitious policy goals, notably the target of 450 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity by 2030. Promisingly still, India is making impressive strides towards the achievement of clean energy goals. Just last month, the country hit a significant milestone of 100 gigawatt of installed renewable capacity. The Indian private sector is similarly rising to the climate challenge while seizing attendant market opportunities. Many leading corporates, in our experience of running 3 big business action campaigns on climate change, have joined hands with the government in committing to a coordinated response to climate change. Now, such private-public synchronization is of consequence. India's burgeoning private sector has a crucial role to play in realizing the policy ambitions for a clean sustainable economy. And the previous speakers have said it in as many words. They've already highlighted some of these points. The point that I would like to make is that commercial and industrial consumers account for more than 50% of electricity consumption in India, with this share set to increase to more than 65% by 2030. At least that is what the projections say. However, of this, renewable made for only 3.5% of total electricity consumption by the CNI segment in 2019. So in this context particularly, the corporate uptake of renewables merits being subsumed under the umbrella of aligned public-private climate action. And I would like to speak about our campaign RE100, which is Renewable Electricity 100 campaign that Climate Group champions globally. It's a global corporate renewable energy initiative, bringing together hundreds of large and ambitious businesses committed to 100% renewable electricity. And the campaign itself is stepping up to this task of supporting governments and supporting businesses in taking their ambitious target of 100% transition. This is bringing together hundreds of large and ambitious businesses committing to 100% renewable electricity. Globally, more than 300 companies have committed to the campaign. But in India, more than 70 companies, which either companies with headquarters either in India or those who are operational in India, are part of this campaign. And I don't want to take names of all these companies, but I think what I would like to say here is that these businesses who are part of this campaign and have committed to this ambitious, action, operate across diverse sectors. They are ranging from heavy industries to hospitality, to retail and manufacturing, all uniting behind a unique, ambitious goal. With many RE100 members, even encouraging uptake of clean power by other businesses, such as members in real estate, fostering renewable sourcing opportunities for corporate clients, renting or leasing office spaces, for example. So I think we are at least from where we are seeing, from the vantage point of where we are standing and looking at the market, I think these are quite ambitious as well as encouraging signals that we are getting. If given a chance, I would like to speak a bit about our policy work as well and how it interlinks with the government policy, but maybe later on. But for now, this is how I would like to, set the scene.
Thank you, Divya, for that opening comment. I can very well vouch that the Climate Group's RE100 is really pushing the demand side, specifically from the private sector, and that's a very well thought out program. Now, after hearing, we know that the demand for RE is increasing, and at the same time, as Mr. Chaslani beginning, he pointed out that we need to deal with the variability in the higher order for the both demand and supply. So let me come back, Mr. Chaslani, to know a little further detail that when you made that opening remark. We will really be interested to know what are the key challenges you find when you hear from everybody that we all understand this demand is going to go up and supply is going to go up, and there is a need for round the clock supply. So what do you think, what are the current challenges, both regulatory or otherwise, like infrastructure or availability, and how we can adopt and implement a very stable environment to facilitate this implementation of renewable energy for the greater benefit? Would you please?
Yeah, I think that's the that's the question which would take the whole it's a complicated question to answer in a simplistic way because it's so much of challenges. But let me talk about few things like if you're talking about the industries see there are three segments here: customers who want actually the green power, more and more people who want green power. I agree with Divya that there's a commitment from most of the corporates now wanting to go green, and even the individuals, like many of us that were residential customers who want to go green and we want to get the green power is there. And then you have the renewable energy producers. So then the third segment, which is the most important segment, is whether you call it a discom or the sector there as a whole. Okay, so in India, that's a complex structure. Today, what is happening is that every single customer who wants to procure green power, okay, from the producer, he is every single customer without an exception is a cross-subsidizing customer in the distribution parlance. Fine, they are paying actually more than the cost to serve. They are cross-subsidizing someone else. These are the customers who actually want to procure a green power, let's say, and then they want to procure directly from the customer, from the producers. That's the where we are facing today the difficulties. Once that happens, then I think nothing to stop us from various aspects. What's happening is the moment these customers want to get out of the discom and then wants to get the power from the producers, what does it result into? Because unless we address some of the fundamental structural issues, because I've seen for the 4 decades, if we don't address the structural issues, we will only be stitching small thing here and there. The residual customer base, what is left with the distribution company, would actually more and more would have their tariffs which are lower than the cost to serve. So therefore, like briefly, the Sanjeev touched the subject of what happened in the telecom sector, USO and things like that. So therefore, the distribution company further becomes weaker and weaker. And the second aspect, what happens is distribution companies would be saddled with the earlier power purchase agreements, which are more expensive. The new power, what is coming in is much cheaper. Okay. Today, compared to the average bulk power cost for any of the discoms versus the new renewable power, what is getting onto the grid, it is always cheaper. So therefore, they will be left with the most expensive thing. Third aspect is that what we talked about, the variability. These customers still, many of them would like the grid as a backup because renewable power, what they're procuring is not this. Take, for example, the net metering concept, which is facing some sort of a hurdles in terms of the distribution companies. What we are saying is that, fine, I have a rooftop, I have a net meter, so I will pump in the power when I don't need it. But that point in time, unfortunately, when the grid doesn't need it. And then when I draw when I need it, but that point in time, grid demand was also higher. So there is a mismatch between these two because we don't have the time value for the tariffs, what we talked about. So there is a resistance. So there is fundamentally structural issues, which is what is actually holding us up today from expanding this connect between the producer and the customer directly. Okay. Unless it is going through the distribution company, which is what government of India is trying today, saying that, okay, you can even buy the green power through distribution company, which is I hope that moving ahead that will happen. I think that is what is the reason why we are facing all these challenges with respect to that open access policies, open access you don't get on time, or the reluctance to grant open access, or you get into a cross subsidy surcharge or additional surcharge, or the standby charges, you make it impossible for the system to work. So there is a fundamental structural issue. We need to address those structural issues for this to grow in a bigger way. One of the ways which I think Sanjeev mentioned is one of the cross-subsidized segment in a big way for us is the agricultural sector. The best way for us to do is that can we move, which we started today, quickly move the entire agriculture sector to renewable energy through distributed decentralized generation system. where you take the generation closer to the consumption point by a distributed generation system. Today, the cost to serve the agriculture customer is very, very high because of the load density and everything, very high. When you take the generation closer to them, the obviously cost of generation is lower, and then the subsidy what is required for agriculture would completely go away. Just the initial cost is what is to be borne. So therefore, once you take out that big segment, the whole issue of cross subsidy to some extent comes from the distribution companies. At the same time, it's all renewable energy. So therefore, that's one area where how do you get more and more entrepreneurs to come in. Today we have a Kusum scheme and various things which are working on, but this would help both the renewable energy sector as well as the structurally to reduce the cross subsidy requirement of the distribution business. So once you take away that portion of it, then I think the step by step is what we need to work, where we align the interests of people like us who want to procure the green power directly, or the MSMEs or any other industry, the producers like Sanjeev and everybody else who actually would like to supply more and more people, and the distribution company. And third, as a country as a whole, how do we actually, decarbonize the whole thing and then get more and more renewable on this? I think these are the challenges what are there. They are inherent in the sector. There are many areas. There are initiatives in the last 1 to 2 years. If you look at from the government of India point of view, whether it is, I said, the Kusum scheme, which is still to catch up, or whichever we are solarizing the entire agriculture feeders, the whole concept of green power procurement through distribution companies, then you don't have this resistance of, I'm going directly to the producer and buying it. I think a combination of all this is what is a challenge to make it happen. Otherwise, today, any producer you ask, he gets frustrated of getting into a C&I business, of directly selling it to this thing. There are a number of issues. So you ask Sanjeev, he can tell you 24 hours non-stop what are the issues he faces on day-to-day basis of how do you actually make it happen to supply directly to the customer. I think unless we understand why does the resistance come from the distribution companies to many of these things, so how do we work towards removing those impediments on a long-term basis? It doesn't work, which is what we tried in the country in the power sector for quite some time to do from time to time as short-term stitches, which didn't help. But now I'm happy to see in the last 3-4 years at least, there are longer-term solutions which are coming in, which is government stack. For example, the latest of green power open access draft document which came in. So fine, there would be issues in the respect of that. How do you implement? It takes time to implement, but these are all the right concepts to move in the right direction towards that. That's what I feel as. There are challenges, but at the same time there are opportunities, and then we are moving in the right direction is what I feel.
Thank you, JP. And I could I noted that you are referring to Sanjeev and entrepreneurship, how it can promote. But let me now then turn to Sanjeev. What exactly motivated you to invest in RE? Because you established Ampra Solar, and do you think your motivation and strategy has really worked? And possibly, if possible, you can touch on what are the effective financing options to encourage more and more renewable energy companies to invest and create capacity the way we are looking towards India's 450 gigawatt. So it will be very interesting to hear your personal story, Sanjeev.
Right. I think I think you are right, and I must confess that I am not a so-called green evangelist or an NGO type of person. I am at the end of the day, we all do business, right? So it will be wrong for me to say that I did it because I love the earth and all that. This is all incidental, right? And if we can mix business with good cause, that's the greatest thing that you can do. I think this is one learning in the process. So while first 15 years of my life, or maybe for 16, 17 years, I was working more in the established system of working in a corporate, trying to do what the corporate shareholders want. And then when you try to do something on your own, then you realize that you can't just do what you're told, because you have to find a way which is required by the society, which is required by the investors, which is required by the shareholders, which is where the world is headed. So you need to create something which is forward looking. You can't just keep on doing something which you are used to doing. So there are many examples of the companies which have failed to successfully transit into the changing world. Like one example, clearly we all are aware is BlackBerry. It comes again, telecom comes to my mind. I say BlackBerry, we have all used it like 15 years back. That used to be like the status symbol of the corporate world. Everybody will carry a BlackBerry, and we are all used to typing on that one. And then suddenly comes the iPhone and the smartphones. The world changes. BlackBerry goes out of business. Kodak goes out of business. So a lot of companies, a mobile phone today has your camera combined, your typewriter combined, your mail system combined, everything is combined into one. Your clock combined, your radio combined, your TV almost combined in that thing. So when you are trying to develop a solution for in your industry, what we are looking for, that what is that people are looking for, where is the technology headed. So if you're not able to keep pace with that, if you're not able to find out the right solution, you become redundant. So I think because I came from energy sector, so my obviously the basic inclination was to work in the energy, and then within energy, if you're able to think little ahead, then you're able to find a solution which works for a lot of people. And distributed energy, the rooftop solar, in my opinion, is one such solution. While as a country, we remain completely focused on large scale power plants because we believe in big announcements. Right? So we like to have thousands of megawatts. But you go to any other country in the world, whether it is US, whether it is Europe, Germany, etc., from where all the solar things started, Australia, Japan, distributed solar, rooftop solar is a much larger part of the whole solar chain, because this is the right way to use that. You want distributed small things which can be absorbed within the grid. You don't want to create new infrastructure. You don't want to block your essential land supplies for 25, 30 years. You don't want to create new transmission things which can create a huge challenge, because the solar plant will build in 6 months, power plant will take, oh sorry, transmission lines will take 2 to 3 years. There's a huge mismatch. So that is the pain of many of the developers that you see today, that there is a mismatch between the generation timeline and the transmission timeline. So distributed solar is the right way to really go forward. And one has to keep on thinking that how do I integrate, again I come to the larger ecosystem of my country, because you have to work in the given policies and regulations and the things. So I don't think the story is any different from what any other uh, you will do in your company. You have to find within that framework that what is my new growth area. So you are like the CSR head, and then you try to give a new direction. Obviously, your P&L guy will say, I don't want to spend even 1 rupee extra for your CSR because my P&L will get impacted. You have to find out that solution which works for both. I think that's what the story is.
I think, yeah, I mean, love for innovation is something which is quite interesting, what you, Sanjeev, telling. But would you touch upon what are the financing options available, how you
Right, so
manage
the
those?
financing is again very good, because I touched on the investors and shareholders. So investors, there are financiers. So now, why there is so much of money flowing in the green bonds into this business? Because the investors, at the end of the day, they are driven by their shareholders, and the world at large is asking for green energy or greening the climate per se. Like, okay, we want to take care of the earth, we want to take care of the climate. So the money is flowing into that side. So you go to any large investor, any large bank, what people say is that I want to invest in the green energy. If you are not ESG compliant, your cost of fund increases by 1 to 2%. No global corporates can today afford that. So you have to be ESG compliant. So the money is flowing to that sector, whether it is from the bank side or from the shareholders, investors, equity provider side, whether it is your private equity funds, whether it's your LPs which are holding the pension funds, whether it is you go to any bank like HSBC, you go to World Bank, people say, no, I don't want to fund anything which is looking dirty. It's like everybody's greenwashing their balance sheets, usually.
Right,
Right?
Sanjeev. I think what you are telling, greening is good business and funding is not a problem.
Right, because
And
that's the thing.
ultimately, building a sustainable business is making world sustainable. No, thank you very much. With that, let me get on to Venkatesh. I mean, to have your arguments, Do you really think that renewable energy can fulfill the demand of energy and replace the conventional energy sources? Vatsila being in this business for long, what are your views?
Very, very good question. Thank you for that. Do we want it or not? We have to go towards that. That's the fact of the situation. So we cannot turn around and still believe that, the conventional plants, which are meant to be taking this 70 to 80% of the loads and running 24/7, can match our needs for future. Future is, as many of my colleagues in the panel said also, it's towards renewables. Solar, wind will come into play. That is given. So if that is given and we have to go towards that, and we are also seeing scales of how we are going in the last 5 years, we have grown 60-70%, and that trend is continuing still with the projections what we see and the policies which are being guided. So with these in the place, what is important now? We need to find ways to integrate renewables into this traditional form of power. And that is where, some of my colleagues talked about availability during some part of the time. So when that some part of the time when there is availability, how can we store them? And that is where we need to look at storage as one of the main things. And then also on the future fuels, when you see storing hydrogen, storing, synthetic fuels is very important, so that this type of intermittency is taken out and we are able to still balance the portfolio through different mix of solutions. So whether we want it or not, we have to pave the way towards that. And that is where, this particular topic, which is very interesting, create the policies and framework and flexibility to build it is very important. And a lot of points we have touched on, and it's happening. Also, a lot of policies are guiding towards that. What we want is also a momentum towards that in the right direction, and also looking at it on a bigger scale and a bigger purpose. So the study which I already explained in my short presentation also showed towards that. There could be the mixes which could slightly vary here and there. That's something which we can always work upon, tune up with the different stakeholders. But importantly, we need to move away from these conventional plants towards renewables and storage, and also new forms of fuel future proofing solutions. So that would be my small take on that.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Your optimist will help us all. Now let me turn to Divya. You have heard everybody on their views, and you touched upon RE100 during your opening remark also, which is a great initiative, I must admit. But what we like to hear from you is that how RE100 is really driving the behavioral changes with the consumers. And do you think that is proved to be a great enabler for the transition in this decade?
Right. Thanks, Prabodha. I think my one response will be yes. And how, I'll elaborate upon how. Basically, our engagement within the RE100 campaign, it cuts across two key themes. One is policy and the second one is technology. And I'm glad that Venkatesh spoke about both previously. So within policy, globally, we have been leveraging the collective voice of members to drive the policy impact. Also, as most impactful policy change happens at a regional or a country level, we have been very strategic about how we approach our work. So we've identified priority regions for policy engagement, and overwhelmingly Asia Pacific emerged as a hotspot, owing to, of course, regulatory bottlenecks that we have been discussing in this session already, and also limited options of renewable sourcing. In Asia Pacific, India is also a country that the members desired for us to look at very closely. Of course, because of our size, because of the energy demand, and our ambition to grow our development pathways. We have worked closely with RE100 India to draft a set of policy asks, providing a clear framework on what it will take to build an enabling regulatory environment for 100% corporate adoption of renewable energy in the coming decade. We are also in the process of kicking off government engagement at the moment. In terms of technology, Climate Group is supporting our partner WBCSD, who are the lead on this project, and putting in place a collaborative platform for the entire energy storage value chain. which includes electricity consumers, renewable energy developers, energy storage technology solutions and service providers, and financial organizations to find innovative solutions to common challenges faced by corporates, including the RE100 companies. And by working an area of policy and technology, including storage, as I said, we are looking to remove barriers to and identify opportunities for scaled RE procurement. And in doing so, we are hoping to support RE100 companies to meet their 100% goals, while also inspiring other Indian businesses to join the campaign. And it's not only about the campaign, it's about the mission and the ambition that we need at the moment, particularly in a country like India. And having voluntarily pledged to power these operations in India and beyond, these businesses are looking to source renewable at scale. And in doing so, these businesses are plugging in with a sizable demand, which is a key pillar of India's renewable architecture. Now, with policy laying the foundations of fulfilling mutually inclusive demand and supply ambitions, RE100 in India is bringing together voices of 70 plus businesses operating in the country. And what it will take to build an enabling regulatory landscape towards the shared objective of decarbonizing the power sector. The RE100 policy proposal has been synthesized into a set of policy asks that cut across a variety of renewable sourcing options, including open access. We talked about it. Some of the previous speakers talked about it. Rooftop solar, Indian RECs and green tariffs. But while there remains a long-standing overarching need for stable and consistent policies over an investment-friendly time frame, the policy asks thematically focus on specific areas for government intervention. And they have been, I would like to mention that they have been developed by RE100 members with support from selected CSOs and industry association so that they are holistic in their approach. And I would like to name some of these organizations which were part of these policy asks. They were Global Wind Energy Council, India Energy Storage Alliance, National Solar Federation of India, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, World Resources Institute, and Worldwide Fund for Nature, which is WWF India. And we are now in the process of kickstarting government engagement on the policy asks, starting with central government stakeholders.
I must admit that's a great collaboration and influencing you are doing. We are running almost, we are over the time now. But before we close, what is one thing you will like to change in one word? I'll start with Divya and go in reverse order before we close. I'm sorry, we are really all time is over. So Divya, what is the one word you will describe? Change.
I think ambition. I would say we have to be ambitious because there will always be challenges and we will have to move across and maneuver across these challenges.
So ambition, yeah, ambition is very much well taken. Venkat?
I would say optimal mix of technologies which provide low cost of solution. That's what is very important for us for a sustainable solution.
Great, technology at cost. Great point. Yes. Go to you, Mr. Salani.
I will say, if I need to say one word, is alignment of interests. Alignment is most important, which is what we are moving in the right direction.
Okay, let us conclude with Sanjeev. What's your take?
My view is always customer first. So whatever customer need, that's what we need to provide.
So policy need to be aligned with customer.